The Council, now trembling, convened an emergency session. They could not ignore Earth's power any longer. The galaxy's strongest empires had been humbled by what was once considered primitive technology, guided by a species that had waited, in silence for centuries. "Prepare defenses," one ambassador whispered. "The humans, they are not what we expected." And they were right. Humanity was more than anyone had imagined. They were patient, clever, and fearless. They were a species that did not merely survive, they mastered survival. And they had waited for the right moment to show the galaxy the full measure of their power. In the void, the remnants of the Vorak scattered, their screams of frustration echoing across light years. Entire fleets that had conquered dozens of systems now fled in terror, not knowing if survival was even possible. And through all of it, humans pursued only what was necessary, leaving the galaxy with one unmistakable message: humanity does not seek war, but if war comes to them, humanity will rise, and it will be unstoppable. For the first time in history, the galaxy understood the truth about Earth. It was no longer a quiet, forgotten planet. It was a force, a shadow, a storm that had waited, in silence for centuries, and now it was awake. And from the hidden depths of the Shadow Gate, more ships prepared to emerge. Humanity's patience had paid off. The galaxy had witnessed the storm's beginning, but it had yet to see its full fury. The Vorak had scattered, their massive swarm broken, their leaders destroyed, and their fleets in ruins. Yet the galaxy remained tense. Every empire, every species, every star system now understood a frightening truth. Earth had returned, and it was no longer a world to be ignored. From deep within the command centers beneath Earth's surface, humans monitored the final skirmishes. Their fleets glided silently through space, finishing what needed to be done. Ships that had slept in shadow for centuries now swept across the void, hunting down the last scattered Vorak vessels with relentless precision. Every movement was deliberate. Every strike was perfect. Humanity's wrath was methodical, unyielding, and cold, but it was tempered by reason. They did not destroy without cause. They did not kill without purpose. They defended, they protected, and they punished only those who threatened their home. Above the planet, life continued as usual. Children played in sunlit parks, cities sparkled at night, and people went about their daily lives unaware of the fleets moving silently in orbit and beyond. Yet, those who worked within the shadows knew the weight of their actions. Every engineer, every pilot, every soldier was part of a legacy that spanned centuries, a legacy of survival, of patience, and of a species that refused to yield to fear or oppression. When the last Vorak vessel was destroyed, a calm settled over the battlefield. The galaxy held its breath, unsure of what would come next. Then, without warning, a single broadcast appeared on every channel, every ship, every system. A human figure stood against a backdrop of stars, calm, poised, and commanding. His voice echoed across the void, simple yet carrying a weight that no empire could ignore. "Earth has returned," he said. "We hid not because we were weak, but because we were patient. We prepared because survival is not chance, it is choice. We built the Shadow Gate not for conquest, but for defense. And now, the galaxy knows the truth. Humanity is not a species to be underestimated." The message continued, each word deliberate, carrying the pride and strength of a species that had endured every trial. "We do not seek war. We do not crave power. But if war comes to us, if our homes are threatened, we will not flee. We will not bow. We will rise. And when we rise, the shadows rise with us. The galaxy will remember this day, not for the death we bring, but for the strength we show. Humans are patient, humans are cunning, humans endure, and now humanity is awake." Across light years, the galaxy felt the impact. Systems that had once mocked Earth now shivered in respect. The Council, humbled and awed, realized that their arrogance had been a mistake. Empires that had assumed humans were extinct understood for the first time the full measure of Earth's power. And even as fear spread, there was admiration. Humanity had achieved what no one thought possible: survival through silence, victory through patience, and dominance without needless cruelty. In orbit around Earth, the Shadow Gate pulsed with energy, its black arch shimmering against the stars. Fleets that had once hidden in the shadows now rested, their work done. Humanity had shown the galaxy its strength, not as conquerors but as defenders, as survivors, as a species that had endured everything and grown stronger for it. And as the last Vorak remnants fled into the void, the humans lowered their weapons, but not their vigilance. The galaxy had learned a lesson: never underestimate humanity, never assume patience is weakness, never forget that even in silence, a storm may be waiting. Earth was no longer quiet. Earth was no longer hidden. Earth had emerged from the shadows, and the galaxy would never, ever forget the day humanity rose. And in the hearts of every human watching the stars there was pride, calm, and an unshakable truth. They had survived. They had endured. And they had finally shown the galaxy what it meant to face humanity and fail. The Shadow Gate remained open, a promise to all who would threaten Earth in the future. Humanity waits, and when the time comes, humanity strikes. Rourke didn't flinch. Then we hit them harder. Target their command vessels, break their formation, give the transports time to escape. His eyes, usually calm and commanding, glimmered with fierce determination. The Jar may have been numerous, but humans had something they did not: courage that burned brighter than any weapon. The first clash became a storm. Explosions lit the darkness, illuminating the Dreadnought's battered armor. The Valiant Dawn roared in response, her engines flaring as she maneuvered through the swarm, dodging attacks while returning fire with relentless precision. Every shot counted. Every impact, every explosion was a defiance against the inevitability of death. A massive Jar battleship attempted to flank the Dreadnought, its massive energy beams cutting toward the human vessel. Rourke's jaw tightened. "All batteries, concentrate fire. Stop that ship before it reaches our transports." The crew obeyed, sending every remaining cannon and torpedo against the enemy. The battleship shuddered under the assault, fire blooming across its hull before it broke apart in a shower of red sparks. The bridge erupted in brief cheers, quickly muted by the next wave of attackers. Even as the Dreadnought destroyed ship after ship, the swarm seemed endless. But the humans did not falter. Each blast, each maneuver, was a statement. We will fight, even if it costs us everything. Rourke moved to the viewport, watching the transports disappear toward the jump gates. Relief surged in his chest, mingled with a bitter sorrow. The lives of millions depended on this one ship and its crew. And yet, they faced annihilation. "Captain," a communications officer called, voice tight with strain. "Char reinforcements are approaching from multiple vectors. They are focusing on us now. We're drawing the entire swarm." Rourke nodded, face shadowed by determination. "Good. That's exactly what we were supposed to do. Let them come. We'll give them a fight. They'll never forget." The Valiant Dawn surged forward, weapons blazing. Explosions lit the darkness, and the void seemed to tremble with the fury of the human Dreadnought. The crew fought with every ounce of strength they had, knowing they were alone, knowing they would not return, yet refusing to surrender even for a single moment. And in that endless night, surrounded by enemies and death, the humans fought with a fire that no fleet could extinguish, a fire that burned for hope, for survival, and for the future of their species. The first clash was over. The Valiant Dawn had survived, the enemy had suffered, but the war was far from finished, and the price of holding the line was only beginning to be counted. The Valiant Dawn drifted through the black emptiness, a battered colossus surrounded by the remnants of the Char swarm. Smoke trailed from scorched armor plates, and the hull trembled under the strain of countless impacts. The ship was alive with the sounds of struggle, alarms blaring, fire suppression systems hissing, and the distant echoes of structural stress. Hundreds of crew members were injured, some screaming, some silent, lying where they had fallen. Yet not one abandoned their post. Not one fled. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the bridge, his face pale from exhaustion, eyes burning with determination. He knew the truth, though he did not voice it aloud. Earth was lost, the colonies were gone, and the valiant Dawn was the last hope to keep humanity's light alive. Every second she held the line allowed the transports to escape. Every second meant children, families, and the future of the species had a chance. In the medical bay, Dr. Anya Voss moved frantically, tending to the wounded. Her hands were slick with sweat and blood, her heart heavy with grief. She glanced at a young technician whose leg had been mangled in the last attack. "Stay with me," she said, voice trembling. "You'll make it. You have to." But she knew the truth. Many of them would not survive. On the bridge, Lieutenant Mara Quinn adjusted targeting systems with shaking hands. Red blips crowded the radar, approaching faster than before. "Captain," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "they're surrounding us. Every vector is closing. Shields won't hold much longer." Rourke clenched his jaw. He didn't flinch. "Then we do what humans have always done. We fight. We hold. We give them a chance." His words were calm, but inside a storm raged. Each explosion outside the hull was a reminder of lives being risked and lost. Every second was paid, in blood. Yet he did not hesitate. He could not. The dreadnought groaned as another wave of Jar vessels struck, tearing open the starboard armor. Fires erupted along multiple decks. Smoke choked the corridors, and some crew had to crawl just to reach their stations. But every weapon fired in return. Plasma beams ripped through enemy ships. Torpedoes exploded in mid-space, scattering fragments that glimmered like dying stars. Rourke's gaze shifted to the jump gates where the last transports disappeared into the safety of hyperspace. Relief mixed with sorrow. They had done it. Millions of lives had been saved. But the crew's victory was silent and bitter. The valiant Dawn had bought time, yes, but at the cost of so much. So many were already gone. "Captain," a communications officer called, voice shaking. "We've received a distress signal from the lower decks. Hundreds of crew are trapped in collapsed sections." Rourke's hands tightened on the console. His throat was dry, but he spoke with unwavering authority. "Send rescue teams. Every life matters. We may be dying, but no one will be left behind, if I can help it." The bridge fell into tense silence. Outside, the enemy fleet surged like a tide, relentless and merciless. The valiant Dawn shook violently with every impact, but she held. She pressed forward, weapons blazing, her engines roaring like a beast fighting for survival. Every crew member, every soldier, every technician knew the truth. They were standing at the edge of death, and yet they refused to yield. In that moment, Rourke allowed himself a thought, fleeting but powerful. Humanity may never see Earth again, but we are not dead. We endure. We fight. We survive. Even if it is only to leave a mark, a memory, a light in the darkness. The valiant Dawn continued her lonely, burning march through space, surrounded by enemies, bleeding in every system, yet unbroken in spirit. The price of holding the line was steep, but the crew paid it without hesitation. They had become more than a ship and crew. They were a symbol. A symbol that humanity, even at its most desperate, could stand unyielding, proud, and defiant in the face of annihilation. And as the dreadnought surged onward, flames licking her hull and alarms screaming into the void, one truth remained clear. The cost of hope was high, but they would pay it no matter the price until the very last breath. The valiant Dawn had become a living storm. Her massive hull was scarred and blackened, shields flickering under relentless fire. But inside her, core burned the defiance of humanity. Captain Elias Rourke stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the endless swarm of Jar ships that pressed forward like a tide of shadows. Every blip on the radar was a life to destroy or be destroyed by. Every second counted. Every breath taken was borrowed from the edge of death. Lieutenant Mara Quinn shouted over the alarms, her fingers flying across the targeting consoles. "Captain, they're breaking formation, reinforcements approaching from the left flank." Our shields can't hold. Much longer. Rourke's jaw tightened. Then we hit harder. All batteries, all torpedoes, fire everything. Leave nothing in reserve. Today we make the Shah remember humans. His voice, calm yet commanding, carried the weight of 1,000 lives. The dreadnought roared. Plasma cannons tore through the void, spears of energy exploding against enemy vessels. Torpedoes streaked forward like comets, detonating in fiery blossoms that lit the darkness. Even point defense guns meant to stop smaller fighters were trained on capital ships, shredding their armor with relentless precision. The Shah had expected a fight, yes, but not this fury. Not this desperate, brilliant madness. On the lower decks, engineers worked feverishly, patching breaches, redirecting power from damaged systems to weapons. Sparks flew as wiring fried under the strain, but they did not falter. Every shot fired, every ship destroyed, was a strike for survival, a statement that humans, even on the brink of annihilation, could fight with unmatched ferocity. Rourke watched as one massive XR frigate charged for the dreadnought's side. "Evasive maneuvers," he commanded. The Valiant Dawn tilted, engines screaming as she spun to avoid the worst of the blast. The enemy ship fired anyway, energy beams, tearing a gash in the starboard hull. Fire erupted along multiple decks. The ship groaned like a wounded giant, yet she continued, unstoppable. From the bridge, Rourke saw his crew, exhausted and battered, yet alive with determination. Their eyes burned with the same defiance that had carried humanity from Earth's first cities to the stars. They knew the odds, yet they fought anyway. He could not help but feel pride so deep it hurt, a terrible, beautiful pride that came from knowing they would not survive, but they would make every second of their life count. Hours passed, like minutes. The Valiant Dawn rained destruction upon the Shah, breaking their formations, scattering their numbers. Ships exploded in showers of red sparks and molten metal. The void lit up with the fury of battle, and yet the enemy pressed on. There was no mercy in their eyes, there was no hesitation, only death. Finally, the Valiant Dawn's weapons began to fail. Cannons overheated, torpedoes expended, power systems critical. The crew, though weary, refused to stop. Captain Rourke moved among them, shouting orders, encouraging, steadying. "Do not stop. Fire with what you have. Every ship destroyed is a life saved." In a final, desperate charge, the dreadnought rammed a massive enemy vessel. Explosions tore through the void. Alarms blared and the bridge shook violently. Yet the humans cheered. They knew their time was short. They knew they were alone. And yet, they were unstoppable. Not in strength, but in spirit. The Valiant Dawn had become more than a ship. She was hope, fury, courage, and defiance all forged into steel and plasma. And as she pressed forward into the heart of the Shah swarm, it became clear, even when all weapons failed, even when the last torpedo was fired, even when the last cannon fell silent, the human spirit would fight until the very last breath. And today, the Valiant Dawn would ensure that every breath she took would matter. The Valiant Dawn had become a scar across the stars, battered, bleeding, yet alive with a fire no enemy could extinguish. Every deck bore the marks of battle. Fires raged uncontrollably, alarms screamed without pause, and the corridors below were littered with debris and injured crew. Hundreds had already fallen. Yet on the bridge, Captain Elias Rourke stood tall, eyes fixed on the endless tide of Jar ships that pressed ever closer. "Captain," Lieutenant Mara Quinn said, her voice trembling yet firm, "we're surrounded. Shields are at 20%. The hull won't last another volley." Rourke nodded slowly. "I know." His hands clenched the railing, knuckles white. He had expected this. They had fought to buy time, and now that time had been given. The transports, millions of humans, were already slipping through the jump gates heading toward safety. That was their gift. That was their purpose. The crew, battered and exhausted, moved with grim determination. Engineers redirected every ounce of power to the engines and remaining weapons. Torpedo bays opened, empty shells clattering on the deck as crews fired the last of their payloads. Even the point defense lasers, nearly melted from constant fire, were pushed to their limits. Every energy cell was consumed in one final effort. Rourke's gaze shifted to the forward viewport. Char command ships were closing in, massive vessels that dwarfed the Valiant Dawn. Their leaders had realized the humans were not fleeing, they were fighting, and for that they were furious. Energy beams carved space like molten rivers, tearing away armor and hull alike. Fires spread across the decks. Smoke filled the corridors, thick and suffocating. Yet the humans remained at their stations, hands steady, hearts resolute. "Captain," the communications officer said, voice tight, "we've received a boarding warning. Enemy pods are approaching from the starboard side." Rourke did not flinch. "Let them come," he said softly, almost a prayer. "They will learn what humans fight like." The dreadnought shuddered violently as enemy pods slammed against the hull. Explosions rocked the decks, hurling debris across the bridge. Yet the crew continued to fire, continued to fight, refusing to yield. Every strike, every blast was a defiance of death itself. In a quiet moment, Rourke allowed himself to look at the crew. Young and old, weary and bloodied, they stood like statues of courage. They were terrified, yes, but they did not show it. They were humanity's shield, humanity's sword and humanity's heart. They were ready to die, knowing that their sacrifice would save millions. Finally, with weapons exhausted and engines struggling, Rourke made the only decision left. He pressed the override on the dreadnought's reactor core, a reactor capable of destroying an entire fleet, but one that would consume the Valiant Dawn in seconds. "All hands," he said, voice carrying over the chaos. "Brace for final impact. We leave a light they will never forget." The crew gripped their stations as the core began its final countdown. Sparks danced across the bridge. Lights flickered. The hum of the dying engines became a roar, a heartbeat of defiance that filled every crevice of the dreadnought. Rourke looked at the stars one last time, whispering under his breath, "For Earth, for humanity, for the future." As the starships closed in, the Valiant Dawn surged forward, a final act of fury and love. Explosions erupted across the enemy fleet, tearing apart command vessels and scattering the swarm. The bridge shook violently as the countdown reached its final seconds. The crew held together, hearts pounding, waiting for the end. And then, with a brilliance that outshone every star, the Valiant Dawn detonated. The explosion tore across the void, consuming the dreadnought and thousands of Jar ships in a brilliant storm of fire and energy. In that instant, the last breath of humanity's courage lit the darkness, leaving a memory no enemy would forget. The Valiant Dawn was gone, but the spirit of her crew, of every human who had fought, lived, and died, remained, echoing through the stars like a promise. Humanity would endure, humanity would survive, and humanity would rise again. The stars were silent now, but the memory of fire lingered across the void. The Valiant Dawn was gone, her colossal frame reduced to nothing more than drifting fragments of metal and light. The explosion had torn through the Jar swarm, scattering ships and crippling their fleet. What remained of the enemy was stunned, reeling from the fury of a single human dreadnought. Even in death, the humans had made their mark on the galaxy. Far away in the jump gates beyond the destroyed system, the last refugee transports emerged into safety. Children pressed their faces against the observation windows, eyes wide with awe. Families huddled together, clutching each other tightly, feeling both relief and grief. None of them had seen the Valiant Dawn survive the final blast, but they had felt her presence, a shield of courage that had carried them to life. Mothers whispered prayers of thanks. Fathers clenched their fists in disbelief, and somewhere in every heart, the name of the dreadnought was etched forever. Captain Elias Rourke and his crew were gone, their bodies consumed in the fire of the reactor core. But their sacrifice was not in vain. Humanity had survived, and the story of the Valiant Dawn would echo across generations. Every human everywhere knew that even when the odds were impossibly against them, they could stand unbroken. They could fight, they could endure, and they could leave a legacy that no enemy could erase. On the edge of the destroyed system, surviving, Char ships regrouped. Their commanders had never faced anything like the humans. One dreadnought battered alone had destroyed thousands of their vessels and shattered their morale. They began to whisper fearfully among themselves. The humans were more than soldiers, they were legends, and legends were dangerous. Legends could not be controlled, could not be ignored, and could never be defeated so easily. Back among the human refugees, hope began to take root. Earth was lost, yes, but humanity had survived its darkest hour. Colonies would be rebuilt, alliances forged, and technology preserved. Children who had watched the stars burn would grow up knowing that their species could rise from any disaster. The galaxy had seen the cost of underestimating humans, and that knowledge would ripple outward like a silent warning. Never mistake humanity for weak. Never assume they would surrender. And never forget the valiant dawn. In memorials across human space, the story of the Dreadnought was told again and again. Ships were named in her honor. Simulations replayed her battles for generations of young recruits. Her crew became heroes, their courage celebrated, their sacrifice taught as the ultimate lesson in bravery. Humanity had paid a terrible price, but in that price, they had forged something stronger than fear. Pride, defiance, and the unshakable will to survive. Captain Rourke's final words became legend. For Earth, for humanity, for the future. They were simple words, yet they carried the weight of countless lives. They reminded every human that courage was not measured in victory alone, but in the willingness to stand against the impossible, to fight for others, and to never, ever yield. The stars, once darkened by war, now seemed to shine a little brighter. The echo of the valiant dawn lingered in the cosmos, a reminder that even in the face of death humanity would endure, and somewhere far in the distance the survivors looked to the future, hearts lifted by the memory of one last dreadnought that had refused to surrender, one final act of defiance that had changed the fate of a species. Humanity had lost much, but it had not lost hope, and the galaxy would never forget the humans who had fought until the last breath. The valiant dawn was gone, but her spirit, and the courage of every human who had served aboard her, would burn forever.